Sure you saw today on social media what the president had to say. Also mentioned in the Oval Office about using an executive order to get rid of mail-in voting, get rid of voting machines. What is your reaction to that as someone that's been a big proponent of election integrity and access in New York State?
Yeah, so first of all, any suggestion that he can just wave a magic wand via executive order and make all sorts of election-related changes is preposterous. Election law is historically left to states and state governments. Certainly, there's some space for federal rules and guardrails. If Congress wants to take up a bill, they're certainly welcome to take one up and consider one and debate one. But an executive order would be laughed out of court if he were to issue one and when it would inevitably be challenged. But to the actual substance, let's be real here. This is a drum that President Trump has been beating for years and years and years as if to somehow explain away his loss in the 2020 election. And I will underscore, he lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden, as if, all these unregistered, improper individuals were voting by mail. And that's how he lost the 2020 election. And that is patently ridiculous. Every single examination, every single study has unequivocally, clearly stated that fraud is nearly non-existent in vote by mail programs. It is comparable, if not safer, than voting in person. And whenever states like Florida, for example, have set up these voter integrity election investigative units to try and crack down on all of this supposed fraud, they spend tens of millions of dollars in doing so, taxpayer dollars. They wind up finding one or two or three people after spending tens of millions of dollars and bringing charges against them. And so let's be real. There are reasons why states, even like Utah, you don't get much more Republican and redder than Utah, have faith and have put in place vote by mail programs for its citizens. It is safe and it is preposterous that Donald Trump continues to whine about his 2020 election loss and blame it on all these made up, ridiculous things that enter his mind.
How much does it concern you that some of the impetus from this is coming from Vladimir Putin, apparently, from what we've heard from Donald Trump? Like, I guess that seems to be the trigger for some of this, right?
Of course, it seems to be. And of course, Donald Trump is getting played like a fiddle by the dictator, the warmongerer, the war criminal, Vladimir Putin, who Donald Trump literally rolled a red carpet out for in Alaska earlier this week. And so, yes, Vladimir Putin is former KGB in the old Soviet Union, and he knows what makes Donald Trump tick. There's a reason why Vladimir Putin, in that meeting, right away, out of the gate, was playing to Donald Trump's ego and said, "You didn't lose the 2020 election," and further playing into Donald Trump's ego and saying, "I wouldn't have started the war in Ukraine if you were president." These are bold-faced lies that are meant to do one thing and one thing only, and that is cozy up to and win over Donald Trump, who has the mental autonomy of a 5-year-old. I have a toddler at home who thinks more independently and can't be so easily won over with platitudes than Donald Trump is.
When it comes back to the mail-in voting, because you do hear from that side of the aisle, I know people that receive different ballots to the same household, and how do I know that someone's not filling it out for me and then sending it in? Why do you have confidence in the process right now with some of those accounts in mind?
Because the data is very clear that what you just described happens so exceedingly rarely that you shouldn't throw out entire programs because one or two or three people in an entire state of millions and millions of voters may be voted improperly. There's also the hypothetical that someone casts an in-person ballot at their local polling place, then runs into the bathroom, puts on a fake mustache, and goes to sign in as a different voter too. We can all come up with hypotheticals and things that are one in a million million. I'm not suggesting that improper voting and voter fraud never happens. There are clear instances when it does happen. But we also have to keep in mind that we live in a country over 300 million people. We live in a country with over 100 million eligible voters. So when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of people voting over the course of elections year after year after year, yeah, you're going to find one or two or five or 10 out of those hundreds of millions that were improper votes. That does not mean it cost anybody a presidential election. It didn't. And it does not mean you should throw out entire voting systems that are 99.9999% secure and safe and integral.
To make it safer, those also on the other side of the aisle continue to push voter ID. You see that on the floor whenever elections come up. And whenever a bill comes up from the Democrats, you see the Republicans come back and say, we want voter ID. So you have to show your license. And Donald Trump say, show his license plate. I didn't know what that meant. But that's the kind of point he was trying to make was voter ID. What about voter ID concerns you?
Let me tell you the thing that the election integrity reform that will actually make the biggest difference. And it was blocked by Republicans at the State Board of Elections for over a decade. We passed a bill this year. It's headed to the governor's desk. I hope and I expect she's going to sign it. And would have New York join a consortium of 25 other states, red and blue states, red states like Georgia, blue states like New Jersey, so that when someone moves out of New York into another state and re-registers, that other state alerts this consortium, who then tells the original state, hey, this person who used to be a New York resident has moved and re-registers, and that tells us to remove that voter from our voter rolls. When you're a member of this consortium and someone dies in your state and the Social Security office is alerted that this person has passed away and to cut off their benefits, this consortium alerts that state, hey, this person has died, the Social Security office has told us, remove this person from your voting rolls. We just had a primary in Brooklyn for city council, a Republican city council primary, where there were a handful of seemingly illegal absentee ballots submitted, collected by one of the candidates, and improperly signed by people who were dead. If New York were a member of this consortium, which this bill would direct us to join, that could have never happened. So, you've got all these things that sound nice, but this is the bill, this is the item. If you care about voter fraud, when it is exceedingly rare and happens, this is what'll stop it. Joining the Electronic Registration Consortium, ERIC, it's called, and joining the 25 other states that work together to stop the fraud when it does happen.
So that's your answer to voter ID. That instead of voter ID. I'm kidding.
This is the policy answer, the correct answer to cracking down on those rare instances where there is voter fraud and making sure our voter rolls are up to date, sound, and accurate. Yes.
Okay. This all comes as, of course, we've heard about redistricting now for a few weeks again. After a couple of years ago, we went through the whole process here in New York, which wasn't, of course, in 2020. It was 2024. Early 2024 was when it finished up. Regardless, this comes as that conversation continues. Where does that fall here when it comes to being fair to the voters and democracy? When you're hearing the governor say things like, we're going to war, you fight fire with fire. Where does this fall when it comes to the same conversation we're having about free and fair elections and democracy?
Yeah, so certainly I think everyone is it's probably best if we tone down the rhetoric and tone down, talk about going to war. But let's also be real. We have a situation here where you have some Republican states, notably Texas, seemingly next Indiana, seemingly next Missouri, and there are others that the Trump administration is talking to coerce them into doing mid-decade redistricting. When you have some states bringing knives to knife fights, you can't bring a butter knife to a knife fight. And so, at the end of the day, the correct answer, the solution to this problem is if Congress would pass legislation barring all gerrymandering in this country. That's the solution. And by the way, that exactly was included in a bill in 2021 that the US House under Democratic control passed. It died in the Senate because it couldn't overcome a filibuster. I would welcome today Republicans in Congress, the House and the Senate, putting up a bill. It could be a standalone bill, it should be a standalone bill, banning mid-decade redistricting, banning gerrymandering. Then the conversation's over. Sign me up to support that bill. Most Democrats support that bill. There's a reason why Republicans don't want that bill passed, why it'll never be brought to the floor for a vote. And that is because Republicans, and this is not me talking, these are independent analysts and analysis that has been done year after year that demonstrably proves that Republicans have benefited more from gerrymandering than Democrats have. That's a fact. And that's why it's never going to end with Republicans control Congress. That's why you see red states continue to do it. And it would be ridiculous to expect that we should only allow Republican states to do this and Democratic states should be high and mighty, get back up on our high horses, do the quote unquote right thing, and just never win an election again. That's absurd.
With all of that, like you said, like you spoke through some of the parameters there. Say in the Democrats' perfect world, that New York could do it. Do you think they should? And can they by 2026? Because that would take probably a challenge in court, right? At this point, because you'd have to go through two legislatures to be able to even conceive that by 28.
Yeah, so here's my answer. New York should not do it if Texas does not do it. New York should not do it if Indiana and Missouri do not do it. In fact, that would be the best outcome here and then find a federal solution like I just described. But if Texas does it, New York should do it. Absolutely. We would be crazy not to. California should do it. They would be crazy not to unilaterally disarm. I am a proponent of everyone disarming. But if one side is unwilling to, that's crazy. So that's, that said, there's a state constitutional barrier to New York doing this ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. Because as you alluded to, the state legislature would have to pass an amendment to our state constitution allowing for a non-court ordered mid-decade redistrict. And for that to happen, it's got to pass two successive legislatures, which brings us past the 2026 election because it's got to also go out to voters on a referendum. Now, there is an outside chance there's maybe some legal mechanism where there's some court action brought. I think it's highly unlikely. I have not heard of any realistic scenario in which a court could order a redraw before the 2026 midterms. But, if the dominoes begin to fall, it can be done for the 2028 presidential and congressional elections.
Doing it before, that's one final response to that, but doing it before 28, does that, in your mind, does that circumvent the will of the voters? Because like you said, there was a state constitution aspect to this that the voters did vote for, independent redistricting commission, the whole nine yards. Does that
Here's
circumvent
what
the voters' will by doing it before that time?
Here's why it does not circumvent the voters' will. Because the only way it can happen is if a referendum passes to amend the Constitution. And then the voters' will is to do it. Now, if the legislature passes the amendment, then it goes out for a referendum and it fails, that's the end of the story. The voters have spoken again. They don't want to do it, and it won't happen. But if the legislature passes the amendment, it goes out to referendum, and the voters pass it, that's not circumventing the voters' will. That is carrying out the new voters' will, and then we should do it. And that's the only way we would be allowed to do it.